Lone Star. So if you haven't taken a look at it, please do so. I'd like to ask the gentleman who spent 21 years restoring that car and making it work to stand up, Jeff Howard. Jeff, would you stand up? The reason I wanted Jeff to stand up is that because if anyone wants to learn more about it and about all sorts of, you can talk to Jeff or I after this event tonight or tomorrow, but tonight would be nice. I guess it's up there. It's not up there, but I'm not really what I have to talk about tonight goes back a long way, but it's illustrative of what happened at Shelby American. In 1975, I have been probably the leading collector of the race Cobras. And Gordon Gimbel was sitting over there. I was talking with him. He said, Mike, you know, the Shelby Lone Star is for sale. I heard about it through a customer or something, and so I ended up buying that too. But let's go back to, I guess, 1969. I've been sort of following the Cobras for a while and figured I really I was going to get the best stuff. Because for various reasons I had been racing motorcycles and always tried to get the best stuff. So I put an advertisement in Auto Week, and I ended up in the Shelby American Torrance shop in the middle of the summer of 1969. I didn't know it at the time, but they were shutting down. And right in the middle of that shop, they had two Daytona coupes, and one they had just sold for $4,000. And the other one, I negotiated with Shelby American, and by, December of 1969, I came out to pick up my Daytona coupe. Well, by that time, that shop was shut down. And the place that was available was the 1042 Princeton, and that's where the car was. And so that was my introduction to Princeton. I started assembling the history, and I ended up putting together this book that if you haven't read it, you really should, the Cobra Ferrari Wars, because it tells all about the Cobra racing. But in any event, I started assembling, talking to people. We didn't have the internet, writing letters, driving around California, interviewing people, including Shelby. And so about 1972 or 3, Shelby gives me the key to this Princeton, the old shop there that some of you have seen on a tour. It's now destroyed. Is go in there and see if there's any records in there. So I went in there, and there were a bunch of records in a big cardboard box of the GT40s, and I wasn't writing or assembling the history on that, so I let that be. And then I looked up in a metal filing cabinet, and there I pulled that out, and there was about maybe 5/8 of an inch bound, very nice, slick done presentation on the Lone Star, this car here. And I knew about it. I thought, wow, this is really neat. But I was doing research on and putting together history in this book on the Cobra race car. So I put that back up in the locker at Princeton, and really didn't find much on the racing Cobras then. But again, a few years later, I wish I had that or knew where it was, that booklet, because Gordon Gimbel told me about the Lone Star. Well, the Lone Star, why did not Shelby American produce the Lone Star? Well, the short answer is because Ford wasn't going to pay for it. Because if you'll go back in the Cobra history, you'll notice that Shelby had everybody else paying for everything. AC cars, the body chassis, Ford, the drivetrain. And so what is the reason Ford didn't pay for it? Well, the reason is pretty simple, that the Lone Star prototype was delivered in May of 1967 to Shelby American. Well, think about it. In June of 1967, Ford won Le Mans again with the Mark IV Ford. So by 1967, Ford's investment in Shelby American had paid off in SCCA championships, back-to-back in NHRA and AHRA championships, in the USRRC championship, and in the FIA big races in Europe. All those wins. So Ford had no monetary, they had already acquired the marketing benefit of being a big winner. And they didn't need to tool up and produce an entirely new car. So that's the short story of why they didn't go with the Lone Star. And there's a little bit more I like to mention. There's another a part to that, and that is that Shelby American was really winding down, and Shelby was tired. And the guys that really made Shelby American click, and there's one of them sitting, there's a lot of people who made it click, but one of the leaders is sitting right there. And what happened was that as those people left, the power to produce something absolutely new and great and to continue this role, this dream, ratcheted down. And you really had four people. You had Shelby, you had Phil Remington, you had Ken Miles, and you had Pete Brock. Now, Pete Brock and Shelby fought some, but Shelby obviously respected what Brock did. Well, if you go by the end of '66, when they were working on, had committed to the Lone Star, Pete Brock had already left at the end of '65. Ken Miles was dead at the end of '66, and Phil Remington, the other guy there, and Shelby were 100% or 150% committed and involved in the Ford GT program, both the Mark IVs and Mark IIs. They were working overtime, and they were also working on the GT350s, and that was what Ford wanted. As a matter of fact, if you think about this, because the Lone Star was supposed to be the 1968 Cobra, and they originally called it the Cobra 3, then they had to change the name to Lone Star. But if you think about this, all you fellas that are familiar with the production dates and records, there was no 1967 Cobra. The 427 Cobra started production in '65, went through '66. They didn't build one of them in '67 because they didn't have, Ken Miles wasn't around to make one. And if Ken Miles was around, he didn't have the time because he also was heavily involved and totally committed to this GT program. So really, the innovation for the Cobras had stopped during 1966. It was over because those people were gone. Shelby was totally committed to the Ford GT program, and Remington was, and the guys who could really tell him and who he would believe, like Pete Brock and Ken Miles, they were no longer around. So everything kind of slowed down. And that's why the Lone Star didn't work and why they didn't adopt it. At the very same time that Shelby American was developing the Lone Star, Ford was developing a very similar car, which was called the Ford Mach II. And Alan Grant has a connection with that because at one time they offered him the management over that project, but Ford did not produce the Ford Mach II either. Ford was putting all its effort into the Mustangs, and at Shelby American that meant racing the Trans Am Mustangs for a couple more years. So that's sort of the story about the Lone Star. Basically, the car is you read Rick's article, it's basically GT40 with a simplified tub and with an aluminum body. That's the car, and I wanted to finish the car because it was really sort of the end of the True Believers Shelby American Dream. It was the last one, and I'm very grateful to Jeff Howard because he did it. It was he had to really work to change it from a concept prototype that you could go out and drive to something that was closer to a production prototype, so you could service it, take it apart, put it back together, and it is very usable, which is very different than a concept prototype. So I don't know. I've got one quote from the second edition of the book I'd like to mention to you, because Carroll Shelby was a great guy, and he used to tell me things, and I would write them down when I could. And one thing I wrote down right before we put out the second edition of the book was, he told me, he said, the most fun in the world is helping someone who really needs it. It's the greatest feeling in the world. So I'd like to say that again. This was not something he thought of. It was on the phone, and it was at night, and I'm sure he wasn't doing this for PR. And what he said was, the most fun in the world is helping someone who really needs it. It is the greatest feeling in the world. So I hope that we can carry that on. And I thank you very much. I'd like to recognize my beautiful wife of 48 years, who set the stage for me through all this stuff. And I want to tell you one real quick story. We got married at noontime by a justice of the peace during my noontime from where I was working. I went back to work, and a fellow said, "What did you do? Where were you?" And I said, "I got married." And he said, where are you gonna go on your honeymoon? This was a Friday, and I hadn't thought of that. So I said, well, and then into my mind flashed, and I'm not lying about this, 1042. I said, I thought, I remember that address, and we can go there. That's by the ocean and by the beach in California, and I'll tell her that. And since that time, I've apologized for that, but she told me it was fun.
Yes, it was.